Hello, hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are at. Thank you for joining us for another ACUHO-I webinar. As many of you may know, this webinar series is part of ACUHO-I's ongoing commitment to spotlight timely topics and elevate voices across our profession. Just a quick note before we get started, closed captioning is enabled. So if you'd like to enable your closed captions, you can click the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. You may need to click on more to see that button. With that, my name is Alexis Foley. I am an educational program coordinator with the ACUHO-I. Um, for those of us who, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are the Association of College and University Housing Officers International, dedicated to advancing campus housing and residence life globally. Once again, we're excited for you all to join us for today's session. Today's session is going to explore the fast-paced and interconnected nature of summer operations and housing and residence life, from facilities projects and space preparation to camps and conferences and all of the things that come with summer operations. That is what we are going to cover today to prepare for a successful fall semester. So we encourage you to participate today. We do want this to be an engaging session. You will have the ability to ask questions utilizing the chat. And then at the end, we may open it up to folks to ask questions out loud. Alrighty. So just as a final note, today's session is being recorded and will be available on the ACUHO-I YouTube channel following the webinar. Uh, we'll also wrap up with a couple of announcements about other upcoming opportunities. So with that, I'm going to pass it to our presenters today, Mallory and Dan.
Yes. Thanks, Alexis. Hi, everybody. I'm Mallory Sedaris. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Assessment and Planning and Director of University Housing at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville.
Good afternoon. I'm Dan Rossner, and I serve as the Associate Director for University Housing at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville as well.
It is wonderful to see you all today. I feel like we should start out by saying thank you for taking time in what we know is a busy summer to talk about some of the nuts and bolts and nitty gritty of all the work that we are doing. I'm in year 18 at SIUE, and the number of times that people have asked me if I'm taking a break in the summer or if it's less busy while I am here is a lot. So I think those of us in the field are aware that this is a very active and complex time of the year, that the success of the fall semester is often very much built upon the success and planning and intentionality of the summer, and that there is a lot of behind the scenes operations and people that keep those things moving so that we can open and have a successful fall term. So we are excited to get to spend some time today talking about those things. When we talk about what we're hoping to accomplish, what we want to learn is that, like, what are some of those key components of a summer housing operation, how they intersect, what those overlapping priorities can look like. I think in our field, there's always overlapping priorities. There's always things that we have to make decisions about. For every yes, that might mean that something else is a later or no, or how can we get those things to collaborate and work together. And so we want to highlight that. And then Dan and I really want to be intentional about strategies that you can apply that are not specific to our institution, but that you can take back and be able to potentially implement with your own team. So when we start out, though, we would love to know more about who's in the room with us, knowing that what summer looks like can vary a lot from place to place, especially depending on what your setup is. So Alexis has a poll for us that I believe she's going to put out there. It's short, 4 easy questions. So if folks could go ahead once that's there and answer those, that will give us a good sense of who's in the room and some of your experiences that may influence what's bringing you here today. Give me a sec. We've also asked like a fun question, but we didn't. Okay, we'll give it another few seconds. It stopped moving as quickly. Awesome. If we press share results, will everybody see that?
So,
Can you see them, Dan?
yep.
Okay. So it looks like, wow, this is pretty interesting. So we have as your department and auxiliary, almost half and half, and no P3s, in-house facilities or campus facilities. Again, 9 and 11, so that's great. And then bulk of our folks in housing operations and some residence life and a little facility. So that is super helpful. Dan, is there anything else you want to see in that?
I don't think so. I think it kind of lets us kind of direct some of this as we kind of talk about what summer operations can look like.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Alexis. So we want to start out, we learned a little bit about you. We'd like to share a little bit about us and SIUE and what you all give you some framework of our background here at the institution and what you can maybe expect or have some context from us. SIUE is a regional public institution. We're about 30 minutes east of St. Louis. We are part of a system, so but we operate pretty independently within the systems can look very different. We have over 3,000 residents on campus, a combination of first year students and upper class students, but our stock is somewhat unique in that we have 3 first year residence halls that are primarily suite style, so 2 bedrooms sharing a bathroom. We don't have any communal restrooms or any like community bath. And then our upper class communities are primarily apartments. One of them is a large residence hall that has apartments and suites within it. And then we also manage our apartment complex is actually like what you would imagine from the 70s and 80s and is 62 individual apartment buildings. So some of the things that we talk about give us different context in just the quantity of some of those setups, especially in Cougar Village. So that drives a lot of our work in the summer. In Cougar Village, that's our large apartment complex. There is a lot of spaces that still have to be abated if there's significant work that has to be done. So sometimes small repairs can take significantly longer because of having to work with outside companies, having to have that abated because there's asbestos. So that is something that we have to continuously factor into our operation as well. We do run a camps and conferences operation. It's not huge. One of our 500-bed residence halls is pretty much full between June and July with camps and conferences. We intentionally are able to keep that small so that we're doing a lot of facilities work in some other areas. That's not always the case other places. So we're going to talk about that a little bit too and what that impact and that balance can look like. Anything else, Dan, that we want to include in that about us? Oh, we have in-house facilities, which is like a large piece. So that's one of the reasons why I asked that question. I'm actually thrilled to see that half the room also gets to enjoy that. For us, it's a real privilege to have our facilities team be a part of the housing team. But we do have plumbers, electricians, carpenters, painters, BSWs, grounds that are work directly within and under the purview of university housing as our auxiliary and only work in our spaces, which it does create some ease for us whenever we're working through summer operations and facilities turnaround. Anything else?
The only piece that I would add is that we are one department that has 3 different units. We have our facilities unit, residence life, and then our housing operations unit. But we all Mallory is our director, and we all work together through that lens as well.
Thanks, Dan. Yes, I currently serve as the director of university housing. I've spent my career here at SIUE and came up through the operations side of the house. And so I will be honest, I kind of get a little geeked out in all of these spaces and what we get to talk about and understand really the value and impact on seeing how all these places can work together. Can I also shout out that I love the friendliness of people responding to questions in the chat? Please feel free to do that if you have some of your own experiences that you'd want to add to the conversation. We genuinely, I am an in-person interactive presenter, so would love the opportunity if you have a question or comment or want to throw something in there, we would be happy to entertain that as we go along for sure. So AI gave me this beautiful visual whenever we were talking about the balance, the mashup, the juggle, all the things that really happen in the summer term. It's not only closing, but we're thinking immediately into summer and camps and conferences and facilities. We do a lot of work in our summer months in our facilities team in terms of projects that really we only want to do whenever the buildings are empty. We're already thinking about fall preparation and planning. Our assignments coordinator wears a different hat every 5 minutes, it feels like, whenever we're thinking about wrapping things up, thinking about summer, thinking about fall. And there's really a lot of people in an operation that have to be in that mindset. And a lot of what we have to do often is train or teach or help those who are new to the space learn how all those pieces work together. I think a good example for us is that often our residence life staff maybe have been an RA, they're coming as a community director, maybe they're a mid-level residence life professional, they've maybe had some exposure. That can look a little bit different in the facilities and operations side of the house. Whenever you're coming in and you're applying for positions and you're becoming a part of housing, you're often learning about the housing part, and the billing or contracts or making the process work part may be the thing that's been your experience prior to coming to the table. And so summer is one of those really unique opportunities we have to not only like do the thing together, but there's usually also a lot of opportunity for learning within our department, as there's folks in spaces that don't typically have to deal with things like assignments, but then they're intimately involved in that whenever they're working in the space. So summer gives us a lot of hats as we think through all of those different pieces of that. For us, we want to, like, we talk about spring closing and turnover. One of the things that comes to mind for us, that release of units and the speed of that. One of the things for Dan and I over the last 5-6 years, we've evolved that process on our team as our tools have changed. So years ago, we used a spreadsheet that was a shared spreadsheet so that a community director could be releasing spaces while they were quote unquote in the field, checking them so that somebody else in an office could see that it was cleared. So someone could start coming and moving the furniture for cleaning and painting. Like they were using what we had then because we did not have as robust of a housing management system. We were using the tools that we could create. As we've moved into a new system, we are able to utilize that, but we still have pieces of that spreadsheet that live in our ecosystem. And so I think it's important to think about, what do you want to prioritize when we're thinking about units and releasing, and really that kickoff to the summer, how important it is to start strong in our space. We don't waste a lot of time before we start turning things around. We'd rather pick that time up at the end. I'd rather have the extra time in August. We all know there's no extra time. But we're going to have points as opposed to trying to give us a little breather. It's easier for us to really hit the ground running in this side of the house. And so the ability for us to do that. So how do we communicate that? How are we communicating that with our team? What's the tool that we're using? And then whenever we walk into spaces, we know our residence life folks, they're going in to units throughout the semester. I would be kind of curious. We don't have a poll for this, which is fine. But like we still do cleaning and safety inspections. So we have a couple times a semester that staff are going physically into a student space. And so sometimes that means we get to identify and catch facilities issues earlier. Sometimes they're pretty hidden behind their stuff. Like we're not moving their things around. We're just walking in and looking at what we can see. But if once they've moved this stuff out, there's been something that's been leaking for 4 months, that's now a much bigger problem. And so how we escalate those things really impacts as well. So what's the plan? How do we do that? How do we make sure that our staff knows what they're walking into whenever they identify that? We do stack. what a lot of people call it. So we have a team of folks that are stacking furniture into the middle of the room and preparing the rest of that to happen. That team for us has grown to a lot of students. And so it's also a lot of turnover of who's used to doing that task every summer, and that can be slower or quicker. And then it's easy to think about big projects, but what are the things we definitely want to get done in terms of inspections and that? So all those things kind of fall and start right away whenever we gear up into the spring, or at the end of the spring into the summer. Dan, is there anything you want to mention with that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it is the emphasis on part of this is the managing both larger projects as well as the smaller and more routine things, and how do you time it to where the spaces are available to get in and do the work, which we'll talk about kind of the timing of residents leaving and coming and all that kind of good stuff a couple slides from now.
Yeah, because we know they're always coming and going. But on the facility side, like we joked, if we've ever seen HGTV, so we don't have cable at my house. My parents do. My kids just totally get a kick out of getting to watch home improvement shows when they're at grandma and grandpa's. And every time, there's the thing that happens that they never anticipated. And they're always so shocked whenever they tell me about that. But we know that happens in our real life. Like it happens in our homes, it happens in our communities, in our residence halls. Hopefully those things are smaller and like mitigated over time. I know in our operation, we had a lot of years where we didn't do the number of inspections that we wanted to do in the summer. So many big projects overtook the little things that really were really important for us to do, and we just didn't do them. And at the time, those were decisions. They were things that we had to prioritize a little bit different, but then we pay for that later when we're not able to get into spaces. So like for us this summer, we have a renewed commitment to some of those inspections and catching those smaller things earlier. That's enabled us to be able to, I think we've already changed like 200 screens or re-pulled 200 screens and that helps us not have work orders in the fall for things coming in people's spaces and that type of stuff. So where can we be proactive in those small things in addition to the big things? I think one of the things on here that's not included is also what's the budget for that? So if you're in a space in your operation where you're responsible for that budget, what is your opportunity what opportunity do you have to potentially spend in the summer to have things ready in the fall? Sometimes it doesn't look any different. Sometimes you're in an operation where we actually do hire summer extra help for our facilities, and we have trades that are plumbers, electricians, carpenters, painters that do come and work for us in the summertime. And so that helps manage our budget so that we're not overstaffed for 12 months of the year, but we do have that temporary help for 3 months. And to be honest, in a lot of cases, they're returners that come back. So it's not totally new people every summer. There are people that have a relationship with our team, with our staff, and then if they work out of the hall or whatever that may look like in your community or in your state, then they're able to come back and work for us in the summertime, and they're familiar with our operations. So whenever you're thinking about that budget piece, if that's within the scope of your realm, where could you potentially make some investment in the summer that's going to maybe save you down the road? Or what does your staffing structure look like for some of those high peak months? Is there some type of temporary options that you have in your pocket that you could use to try to increase your capacity in the busy summer months? All right, I'm going to pass it over to Dan.
So a large part of what we do over the summer is really considering the fall planning and assignments. And there's a lot of different pieces of information that seems to be ever changing that kind of feeds into that formula. We do rely pretty heavily on our partners over in enrollment management as we plan for what occupancy is going to look like in the fall and how we prioritize those spaces. As I'm sure other folks in this space have probably felt, there's been some turbulence in terms of what types of students are coming in. For here at SIUE, we really try to hold our recent high school graduates living in our first year communities, our 3 residence halls, and then kind of everyone else living in our upper class areas. But we've had to have some changes over the last several years, and some of that has been in flux a little bit, but that impacts move-in dates, when folks are coming, when spaces are ready. And it's important to think about what those timeline considerations look like, especially as like the information that I have last week can look drastically different this week. I think a big part of what really makes or breaks summer operations is communicating space availability. Are there units that have gone offline? As Mallory mentioned at the very beginning, Cougar Village, our traditional apartment complex, is an incredibly complex space to manage, because we operate 62 different apartment buildings that each have about 8 apartments in each building or in each unit. And they each have their own individual HVAC system and water heater and kitchens and all those things, and they're all 70 years old. And while we do try to life cycle and stay ahead of it, we do rely on residents to report issues timely, so that we're able to get stuff scheduled. But anytime that any work really needs to be done, there is generally a level of abatement that has to happen. And so it is not uncommon for units sometimes to be offline, hopefully a few months, but sometimes it can be longer than that, depending on what the issues are, if we're able to get parts, if there's capacity and kind of balancing other issues. We spend a lot of time prioritizing, like we can get this unit back within a couple months, whereas like this other unit could be like 6 months once you get kind of everything scheduled. And so communicating that between, like we regularly communicate with our facilities colleagues, when units come offline, how long they're going to be offline, what is an anticipated return date, knowing that really until it comes back online, it's not totally usable. But how do we make sure that those get put back into the system with that? Along with that, sometimes we have to move students. Sometimes it's just on paper or in the system. And again, as some of you in operations know, like some students that select their space are really tied to the lakeside view that they might have or being close to the woods, and are like really upset that they're being moved. And so we work through that, but sometimes there is that move element as well. Move-in days have also grown a little bit more complex, as I'm sure a lot of you have experienced over the time. We used to have like a move-in day or maybe 2 move-in days or a couple, but it was all pretty regulated. At least for us, our calendar has shifted. I would say a little bit more so than normal, whereas last year we had a week between the end of summer and move-in, which creates really tight turnarounds for students that aren't returning for fall. But there's been a rise in special groups that need or want to move in earlier ahead. And so it's not just like, are the desks open and are we ready? Is training complete? But are the spaces ready? And especially if we consider the different domino moves, for students moving out and new students moving in, do we have adequate time to prep those spaces? Were those spaces empty at the beginning of summer so that if they needed to be repainted or if we needed to get in and do some other work, that we have time to do that? Late departures and early arrivals, again, for us, those numbers have grown pretty dramatically. Late departures at the end of the spring semester, for a variety of reasons, and same with early arrivals. But how do we communicate that effectively with facilities as we're reviewing requests? How do we not overload them with just like, hey, I have this request, is this unit going to be ready? And sometimes it's as simple as, well, we're just going to, if the student wants or needs to move in early, we may need to relocate them to a different unit, which again, most of the time that's just in the system and they're not physically moving. But other times, we have students that are like, I need, or just show up and it's like, I need to move in. And how do, thinking it through, how do you manage that? How do you communicate and make sure that folks have up-to-date information on what units are ready to go?
I think one of the things that's important to note whenever we think about our different teams within our units is where people typically work usually influences the amount of understanding they have about the process or like what that means. Like I remember very vividly a few years ago having a conversation with our facilities office team. So like the folks that were getting the requests about early arrivals and that type of stuff. And they had a lot of frustration about what they perceived as like this very they didn't know the process that went into being an early arrival. Like the assumption was we just, anybody who came through the door, we were saying yes, and we were taking their $22 and being happy about it. And I'm like, we're not, the $22 early arrival charge for the night is not why we're letting them come in. And so there was an opportunity within our unit to actually talk about what the process was to a request and get an approval for an early arrival. And that there was criteria, that they were being reviewed by staff, that often they were a part of a group that maybe we were utilizing. Maybe our facility staff didn't know that we let our move-in crew folks move in a few days early. And so those students are actually then like turning around and serving the department, but they don't know that. To them, it was, I have this list of hundreds of students, because at one point, like especially with our move-in crew volunteers, it was very easily hundreds of students that sometimes you tell me one the day before and I thought we had this done. Like it's viewed as a more black and white process, which then in another space of the department, it can be seen as very fluid, or this understanding or knowledge, just simply knowledge that what went into that. So I think that's an important piece to consider. And some of these processes that may live in one area but have impacted another space, is there opportunity to talk to them about what that means? I think to be honest, like in our operation, like didn't want to complain about it, and they were just like making it work. But in some places, our facilities team was then going like 10 steps that really it would have been most appropriate for them to say, hey, this is going to cause like a much bigger issue. Can we look at other options for that student? Maybe the answer is no, but they were just moving without the dialogue. And so I think that's something to keep in mind, is do all the players maybe know some of the things that contribute, that like feed into those decisions? And is maybe there opportunities for kind of one-off discussions or trying to help set some of the parameters and guidelines around that?
Continuing on, and I know we've talked a little bit about this already. Our camps and conferences program is small, and I would say continuing to grow. I think that there are also camps and conferences are complex on a university's campus, because I think that there are expectations by the institution as a whole. A lot of folks see it as a marketing or way to market to students, that may come here in 10 plus years from now, and be able to experience campus. But there is a balance between maximizing what that usage looks like, with what facilities projects need to be done, so that we can continue doing that. We've had some pretty extensive projects on our residence halls, between replacing flooring and a lot of bathroom work and stuff that legitimately cannot be completed during the winter break. Our winter break is really only a couple weeks. And so to get folks in and out of spaces and turn them around for us to open in the spring is incredibly hard. And so a lot of that is, especially as we're communicating with partners across campus that may want to bring a camp, it's really just educating them on our process to make sure that the students that we're serving, our primary students that we're serving, for fall and spring housing, we have to keep those spaces maintained. And we have to keep reinvesting in those spaces, especially as our buildings get older and older. And I think for our campus, where it's a little bit more challenging, is our residence halls are relatively new. Our oldest residence hall was built in the mid 90s. And so for a lot of this is the first big like iteration of like larger projects. And so that's just not something that our partners have experienced. And so I think that education piece is huge.
Yeah, and if you have like a couple years ago, we were kind of had a peak of demand around camps and conferences, to be honest, kind of pre-COVID, where we had to put together some criteria of how we were going to prioritize those camps and conferences, because we were doing rooftop units and ACs and unit ventilators and the things that keep the moisture out of the buildings. Like we didn't have the opportunity to have more than the one building open, and so we had an internal dialogue about how we were prioritizing. Is it things affiliated with the campus come first, things like pre-collegiate programs, our partnerships that with some of our local high schools that are connected to them, and then also like university camps. We have percussion camp and soccer camp. Like those are revenue generators for those departments as well. And so recognizing that, like, what's our role look like to be a team and university player, so that we're not necessarily bumping campus entities for off-campus entities. But then I think the flip side of that is, are we communicating that? Do they know the deadlines? How are we able to? So if we have to have this criteria, if we have to have this parameter, like if you live in a space where it's like, we only have this many beds, or we can only do this type of space, what does it look like to communicate those expectations, make sure people know about that, and then be able to frame decision-making around that?
And with ongoing summer housing needs, just real quick, again, I'm not sure if other folks have experienced this, but academic scheduling over the summer has drastically shifted since COVID. There's a lot more online classes. I recently had a conversation with the registrar's office. Historically for housing, we had our May term housing, our first 5 weeks of summer, and then second 5 weeks of summer. And it had been like that for forever. And most classes fit into those categories. We recently saw that some students were like, I need to stay 2 weeks later, or I need to come 2 weeks earlier to a term. And so I called our registrar, and as now discovered, there are 23 different summer terms for courses. Still a heavy online, but for access for students to be able to, and may not be able to engage in online courses at home. That it looks different now than it did even just a few years ago. Student employment rules have also changed. Who's eligible to work on campus? There's also been a greater push on campus to hire additional student workers. And so looking at what that housing piece looks like. And then financial aid has been a continual like turbulence in terms of what students have access to over the summer and how much it's kind of like what they have left over and are they eligible for additional funds. But I say that all to say that it means that there's a lot more last minute. I need housing for this next term that starts in like 3 days, which then can impact any domino moves or consolidation or deconsolidation pieces with that as well. Um, so this next section will talk about coordination strategy, which really talks about our specific strategies that we've used to manage what summer looks like. We'll talk about our cross-functional collaboration, which is really our summer operations group, communication and what role that plays, and then really kind of the big picture and the daily details that we keep up with. So we recognized early on the importance of cross-functional coordination and collaboration. When I started, our summer ops team was probably close to 20 people. It was too many at times. And I think it really took a hit on efficiency. I think that there was everybody needs to know everything about summer, which I just really kind of slowed down a lot of the different processes. And so we reevaluated. It also changed like who was heading it up each year, kind of rotated throughout like staff availability. And so it's now moved under our housing operations umbrella. But it's really built throughout the academic year. Our group spends quite a bit of time together, but I would say more consistently runs from like late February through like the first week of September. It used to meet weekly. We have cut down on meetings, especially for our facilities folks that like just really need the time to be out doing the thing, which has been great. And so it's kind of more as needed. We do a little bit more planning before summer kicks off, planning our calendar, making sure folks are good with dates, and then move into kind of the more as needed as each kind of component of summer comes up is typically when we meet. And then late August, September is when we do our wrap up, get feedback. How did things work? Where were there challenges? It consists of housing operations, facilities, and residence life staff. We may add additional folks like on an as needed basis. So maybe the community director over summer housing may need to be pulled in because we're doing bike removal process So they're aware of what that process looks like and what their role is. But we do have kind of our smaller core group that is the primary function. We look at both large picture items such as term dates, what are the large facilities projects, when are folks going to be in which spaces, as well as kind of the more smaller picture check-in, check-out reminders. We call a lot of students because they forget that, oh, I'm supposed to check out. I'm only here for summer one, when really in reality, I need to be here for the whole summer. Any transition reminders, we do consolidate students into one section of housing, like many campuses do, and then we deconsolidate them in late summer. So we have time to go back through and clean those spaces. If we're able, in a perfect world, when we're able to keep students in the same space that they were in the spring through summer and in the fall, we do try to do that. But again, as many of you know, sometimes the puzzle just doesn't fit like that. We do keep updates on summer conferences, and that team, which is housed within Residence Life, but they do provide updates as well. As we've cut down on the number of meetings, we're a Microsoft campus, and so we've really utilized Teams as well as a Teams chat, both to store documents as well as post updates, or hey, do we have updates on like these spaces? Are they good to go? Especially as Residence Life is re-releasing spaces back to facilities for checking, or if facilities says, hey, these units are now ready to go, and kind of managing what that inspection process looks like. In terms of technology, we've gone back and forth. As Mallory said, it used to be like a plethora of split spreadsheets, to put it kindly, and a long time ago when they were stored on the network drive, only one person could be in it, and then they were saving copies, and it was archaic. We've since moved to which I'll talk briefly about what we use, but I think as folks think through, because we've looked at different options throughout the last several years, I think some key questions to ask are, how are units released to be cleaned and repaired after Residence Life checks them for damages? And then how are those units put back into service once facilities is able to do that? I think that's a core question. I think one of the challenges with that is that a lot of systems look at individual beds, which for like Residence Life and housing operations, that's important because it's per student. Facilities, though, they're going to blitz the whole unit. And I think it's finding that balance of how can they efficiently clear a unit, know that it's totally empty and ready for them to get in there, and then how do they know once all the work's been complete with that. I think it's important to think about what system does facilities use, and is there a way to kind of integrate some of that information, and comparing that with what the business office or assignments office uses. We are a Star Res campus, but we still use a mix of Star Res as well as we do have a spreadsheet for kind of releasing spaces because we can look at that whole unit versus the individual bed. Facilities uses TMA for their work order system. So depending on urgency and some other things, staff do submit work orders for some of those things. For the end of year damages, especially for pieces that need to be replaced or heavily repaired, we share that information directly with them, so they can kind of prioritize where that makes the most sense. I think other considerations to think about, ease of use, especially if it's a high turnover area, if you're spending a lot of time having to retrain staff, if it's a really unique process, is that the best use of time? But there is a balance with that. The other piece that I think really drives our process is because we don't have, I think part of it is because we don't have community bathrooms. We don't have a large number of custodial staff. And so we do outsource our cleaning. And so we do need our outside vendors to have access to when units are ready and when they're complete with the process, that then can update our facilities team as they're kind of managing that workflow. But we're not going to grant them access to our housing management system through there. So some of those are drivers for the decisions, and I think just considerations to think about.
Dan mentioned, I want to clarify, we do have some staff BSWs, but we do use this outside cleaning in the summer. But I think that's another example of like, what does that mean to potentially staff for your season if you have the opportunity to do that? Like we go out to bid. We have like a bid process to find who's going to clean. Again, similar, there are a lot of the same team members that come back each summer. We actually have one cleaning company for our residence halls and a separate cleaning company that does our apartments. And so we're able to make sure that they can meet our timelines and those capacities, but those vendors don't really work our hours. And so that's something to kind of bear in mind. Like they have deadlines and then they meet them, and that might mean very long days or working on a weekend. And so those expectations and relationships to make sure that's possible for them to meet what we need them to do in a way that is also safe and secure is really important. So something to think about as you're thinking about maybe potential vendors that could be integrated into your summer operation to help meet some of those goals. We're going to kind of get to the end and talk about what do those campus partnerships mean? Can you leverage those to make for a more successful summer? And then have some opportunity if folks have questions. Whenever I have spent a lot of time in my ACUHO-I life talking about the importance of campus relationships and trust in those. We just completed an external review for our department, and that was one of the things that really came across as something of high value for us and for our team across campus. And one of the things that was part of that was this, like, I know that they're being honest in what their situation is. Sometimes what we're telling you is good, sometimes what we're telling you is not so good, but we will work together to try to find that solution. And I think it really speaks to the importance of trust whenever we're thinking about those professional relationships. Like, what does that mean to give the information that people need so they understand, to also know that that doesn't happen in a one-off. Like, building relationships with critical partners is really important, and that it's not just happening like, oh, I need help in the summer and that's why I'm calling you. We have identified that there are certain times where we have to make hard decisions that people don't love or may have implications for other areas, but whenever it makes me happy, whenever I know that we have heard, I don't love that, but I trust Dan, or I trust Mallory, or I know that housing is trying to do the right thing. There's a lot of value in that. So I would just encourage you to think about what your departmental reputation is, your individual reputation on your campus. What does that look like to strengthen that? What does it look like to invest in that with the people that, like, it can't be everybody, but you know who those players are that for you in your role can really make an impact. One of the ones that I've noticed this year has been our relationship with purchasing. As procurement things have changed, and that has changed, that's been a department that has been important for us to get to know on multiple levels, how we can support them and how they can support us. And so as you see those opportunities, talking and getting to know people, I would encourage you to take that, because you might really see there will come a time in your summer, like today, whenever I had to say, I really need this signature so we can move this thing forward. We will do this other stuff, to have somebody trust that we've done what we need to do in that, and they can move that, and then we will make sure that we get all the steps. So really important thing to think about whenever we talk about understanding the housing program out when you're not in housing. One of the examples that Dan and I thought of was, I would imagine most of you have host campus tours in the summer. So we're also balancing having our showroom available in the summertime. For many years, as long as I've been here, there has been a 2-week break before at the end of the spring, before we start into those summer campus tours. So we get a little bit of a breather to do the work we need to do in the building, where the tour is going to be held the rest of the summer. Typically, it aligns with like when orientation is kicking off, but there's like a 10-day period where there's not a housing campus tour available. Now, on your campus, that may not need to be necessary at all. You may have multiple buildings. There might be lots of other spaces. In our world, our first year residence hall, there's 3 buildings. Like, there's not 10 or multiple places for them to choose. And this also came through my own vice chancellor. We got this email of like, we really need to show the showroom. There has to be a way there has to be, right? Like, there has to be a way to show the showroom in those 10 days. And I was like, I mean, there is, but they're going to be doing construction in the lobby. They're pulling up, they're starting to, the cleaning company's coming into that building. We're replacing vanities in the 2 weeks that we have before camps and conferences go in. And all the other buildings, like the work is starting the day we closed for summer. And so basically we had like this, we're happy to try to make work, but I wanted to let you know really what the reality is and what the status of that condition of the building would be. We would be happy to make sure we have an updated video that if you want to show that during the campus tours on that day, if you can put out like that, hey, housing tour won't be available, but we will have this updated video. It will have some new information in it. We would be happy to do that or to explore one of these other options. And it was interesting because our vice chancellor of enrollment management, I I got ready to send the email. This is the story in this. I'd written this whole long thing up and I got ready to send it. And I was like, I'm just going to call Kevin. Like sometimes picking up the phone is actually better. And so when I called, I was like, hey, I'm getting ready to send you this email. I'm still going to send it to you. But I just wanted you to know this is actually real. Like, here are some of the things that are happening. We're happy to do what we can, but they're going to be kind of walking into a construction zone. And his comment was like, oh, I had no idea. This is a fellow employee who's worked at the institution for many years, has been involved with tours for many years, and was like, I had no clue that you guys meant you literally started doing work Monday after commencement. I said, yeah, like it's happening. He's like, I got it. We will take care of it. The video would be great. Please get it to us. We did that. But to me, it was this really good example of like not assuming one that people know, because even my vice chancellor was like, I'm sure they can show you a room. And then I was like, we actually can't without doing all this other stuff. And so we found a way to get to a yes with the video, but we also were able to use it as a learning moment of like, here's actually what's happening for us in the summer. So take advantage of those, help those critical campus partners know what's important and what you guys are working on. That intentionality around what is happening. A non-negotiable may be about certain types of space. For us, it might be about a contract with somebody who's coming in to do, we're replacing the fire alarm system in a building this summer. That work is going to take most of the summer. So they're starting as soon as the building's empty. And that piece is really non-negotiable. Like we've negotiated that start date. That's when that vendor starts. They're done on X date. And so helping folks understand that is an important part of that understanding of the program. So as you think through that on your campus, who are those people? Some of the ones that I started thinking of were like for us, facilities, like if facilities, even with facilities in-house, we have to have a strong relationship with our campus facilities because let's say they decide they want to turn the water off for 3 days because they're going to do a water main project. Well, I have to have water to be able to keep cleaning. So like, what does it look like to make sure to maintain and have strong partnerships with those in those spaces? For us, Summer Bridge, it's called Summer Success. Summer Bridge is a more generic for like those pre-collegiate programs. Students might be staying in July. What does it mean to balance the spaces available to what they want to grow that program to be? How do you have those, get to know the folks in that area so that they know, oh, I can't just say we'll take as many students as we can because they understand that we don't have that many beds open in the summer to do that. Dining hours, Dan mentioned student employment. So who are those folks? Who are the people that need to know about your operation, can be allies for you in spaces where you're not? Like if they know, hey, I know housing can't, like they are doing major work in X building this summer. So they probably can't do that. They might be able to do this though, because you're not in every space. So building those relationships, having those allies that are in critical areas can really help to like maximize your success and help people know what's going on in your area. Because I do feel when folks feel informed and know the why, that generally helps to alleviate the stress or at least the negativity about maybe the answer. And especially when we can be solution focused. The example of the showroom is we didn't just say, nope, sorry, can't do it. But like, here's the why, but we could do the video, but we could do X. Some of it is about giving more choices and campus partners really want to collaborate or can be good collaborators with that.
So as we kind of sum up, and we definitely want to leave some time for questions if folks want to jump in or post something in the chat. I think as as you're thinking about how to best navigate summer, it's really important that you have a cross-functional team um, that is that can kind of help manage that. It's important to be thoughtful though about who, like it doesn't need to be everyone, even though that summer does tend to touch pretty much every person in housing. Um, but what does that core group look like? How do you communicate? How do you share information? How do we make sure that, in today's fast-paced world, how do we share timely and accurate information at the current present moment that I know that this room is now open and we can get in there, or this room is now ready to go and we can have students move in. How do you best utilize the technology? Again, as I'm sure a lot of campuses have experienced, both within their department, but definitely as an institution, there's a lot of overlap in terms of software and services. And how do we maximize what that looks like? How do you continually communicate? I think this is both internal and external. How do you communicate with your partners within your department? How do you communicate and build trust with folks outside? But how do you keep your students up to date? Because again, sometimes things may pop up where there are times where we may need to call an apartment full of students and provide them an update or see if there's any flexibility when they're consolidating or moving. But how do we manage that piece of it? How do you plan? Going back to the very beginning, I think the most challenging piece with summer is that we're in the thick of it every day, but we still have to be looking forward. What does fall look like? How are we ready to open in the fall after we've made sure that everything is closed out in the spring, or really while we're closing everything out in the spring? And then, really the biggest lesson is being ready just for last minute emergencies and changes. There's always, it never fails. And I'm sure that everyone on this call has experienced this. It never fails that some wrench is kind of thrown in, whether it be a facilities issue, whether it be um, a change in when a group of students needs to move in, or kind of anything in between, staffing vacancies, but something always pops up. And what are the contingencies that we have in place so that we can successfully manage that? So with that, or we can open it up for questions.
No, I just tagged you all in the chat, but if anyone wants to unmute, that's actually also totally fine. Anything else out there? Quiet.
Oh, can you hear me? I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it sounds like you guys have a pretty strong like summer camp and like conference operation. So I'm just wondering in terms of kind of the marketing, advertising side of things, is Res Life and housing operations involved at all, or like are you guys kind of just getting a call from marketing saying that this group is coming?
So most of it is pretty in-house, but I would say it's very driven from things that are happening on campus. Like I was just sending a message to our staff member that manages our campus and conference program. So we do, our residence life team has an assistant director who one of their additional responsibilities is summer camps and conferences. So they are who is like managing those reservations and managing the spaces in that building. And then they work closely with our assignments coordinator and our operations office to make sure that all the things work in terms of the availability of the space, or if there's groups that are coming to later till the end and it coming in. But we, to be honest, don't have to do a whole lot to stay full for the one building we have available to do camps and conferences. Most of the time, our summer success program is about 120 students. The month of July, the 5 weeks prior to the start of the fall semester, they're in the building. We have large programs with a couple of our athletic teams, particularly soccer, cheer and dance, wrestling, where they host overnight camps for like a week at a time that may have 50 or 60 students participating in them. And then we have a lot of smaller, I think what she sent me, like over 15 camps that are like 15 or less people.
Hmm.
Percussion camp, um, we actually have a group of people that are here doing like a grant, like working on research, and they come and they stay on campus because that's an affordable way to do that. So as long as we're in one building, we're really managing that within mostly word of mouth current university groups. I think as we expand potentially in like 3 years, as we get done with some of these large deferred maintenance projects that we're doing in the residence hall, then we would probably have to have a little bit different strategy in terms of how we wanted to fill those. But most right now, it's driven by campus partnerships.
Quick question. The in terms of the conferences and or camps that come to your institution, um, I know here at Auburn we do not, unless you are associated with a program on campus, you can't utilize our summer housing. And I did want to follow up with something you just said. When you talk about research groups that come in your 500 bed building, I know we're pretty hamstrung, and probably justifiably so, post the things that happened at Penn State and the challenges that they had, that we're not allowed with our minors on campus policy. We're not allowed to utilize anybody who would be considered college age or adult in the same buildings. Do you guys have any challenges with that?
They actually stay in a different I would say that makes this even more complicated. We do have like four apartments in Cougar Village that we use for those larger grant groups, that are really on their own. Most everything in the residence hall is like younger youth with their sponsor or whoever is with them, and what that ratio is to that. So that is how we manage that. However, they are in the same building so they're campus affiliated, and they have the ratio number, I don't have it off the top of my head, I think it's like 5. I mean, there have to be a lot of adults to each youth. But they are in the same building as some of our like summer success program, which are those pre-collegiate students who are high schoolers. So there is most of the range is, I would say, primarily high school, but some of the camps can have like 7th and 8th graders.
Sure.
We do, and quickly, like we have expanded in the last couple of years to offer intern housing, which that piece has been a little bit more complex, because a lot of the time, like sometimes they are SIUE students, but oftentimes, especially just because of our proximity to St. Louis, and this is a program that we're looking to grow, but it's complicated in terms of how do you place interns together that really can't select a requested roommate, because a lot of the organizations that are in companies that are sponsoring them are not large enough to have multiple. Like it's not like we're bringing like Boeing is not bringing in 10 interns to live at SIUE. We have this accounting firm that is bringing a student. We have this other place that is bringing another student. But that has been a growing population over the last couple of years as well.
And we use our apartment complex for that.
Yeah.
Well, we typically will utilize, in terms of the research programs or the long-term stay, a little older groups, we try to house them in the same place with our residents that are summer residents, because in theory they're all students. And
Yeah.
now, if we have a program that is sponsored by someone who brings in, I don't know, a training type program with a 30-year-old to 40-year-old person, now then we may have to make an adjustment based off of, if they're not considered students, then we have to come up with another solution, i.e., maybe an apartment type situation.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some similarities because like our summer residents, so SIUE residents that live with us in the summer, they live in our apartment like they're consolidated in our apartment complex in Cougar Village. So they really are ultimately in that same community as some of those grants and intern students. Again, though, like I mentioned, Cougar Village for us is 62 buildings. So there's a fair amount of separation, if we wish there to be, or it's easier for us to keep them close together if so.
Right.
I saw somebody had a hand raised. I know we're at 2, but if somebody had a hand raised, I'm happy to answer the question.
Hi, I am interested in knowing how the custodian coordinator interacts in terms of determining which residences will be used for summer and if they have any say in how many people can be in that residence, or if all of this is managed and determined by housing operations.
So I think we would view it as kind of that how that summer operations team in collaboration helps drive those decisions. So like when we talk about the summer cluster, like where our summer residents are going to live, that is a decision that's discussed among that team because there's people from custodial, there's people from operations, there's people from assignments. So there's all the folks that know the different things that might be really important to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Types of space, what's going to be open, what hasn't been turned over in a couple of years, like where do we don't want to keep consolidating them to the same building because then we don't get in it as much. So that's really that summer operations group helps drive that.
Okay.
The movement of the cleaning company in terms of like the order in which they go through an assignment and checking, that is managed in our facilities office in conjunction, who is a member of that summer operations team in conjunction with our assignments staff as well. So I would say it's pretty collaborative in our approach. Dan?
Okay.
And
Thank you.
our conference building, I think that was part of the question too. Those are typically determined the fall before that summer, because we'll have to work through bids and because a lot of the larger projects, if we're replacing flooring or doing like, we'll have a lot of that lined up well in advance of, and most of the time it's what building is available, and it's less of a choice in that. But there are some like dominoes with where we house athletes because we may have like our spring sports may need to stay, and so like that can cause issues if they're going into either the conference building that needs to be ready to go, or if we have facilities projects that are going to take the majority of the summer that have to get started immediately. So we're typically having those conversations pretty well in it, like months and months in advance.
Thank you.
Well, it was a pleasure. I think I speak for Dan and I, like we're happy to be a resource anytime. So if you think of a question after this and want to ask it or get more information, please feel free to email either one of us. And we appreciate you all taking time today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mallory and Dan, for providing some really great insight for folks during this really, really busy time of year. It never stops in housing. So in the chat, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. In the chat is the link to our upcoming events for ACUHO-I. We are going to kind of be on a little bit of a webinar hiatus because we will be hosting Campus Home Live in Orlando, Florida next week. So we hope to see some of y'all there. But again, thank you so much, Mallory. Thank you, Dan, and thank you to everyone who attended. This recording will be on the ACUHO-I YouTube channel, so feel free to go back and review it. But with that, we appreciate y'all and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you.